In this project I'm going to make 4 fishing nets, and what I've done so far is I drew a straight edge with a scrap piece of wood on some 1/2-inch plywood right there, and then what I did was I sketched out the pattern for the first fishing net, the smallest one. Looks like this. Centered it on the line so it's symmetric. And what I did was using a piece of 3-inch scrap wood, lay it out so that one side is right up against the first pattern, and make a small mark, and then move it to the next position under the mark, and then move that all the way around the pattern. That will give me the size for the second biggest net. Move it over to the third and fourth, so that'll give me 4 patterns. What I did in this step was I drew a radius in this area here, right here, around this way. And what that does is it provides additional material on this inner part here that's going to be the handle, where the little thin strips will be able to glue to, and it'll secure this portion better, with a little radius right here. I'm going to start cutting out the pattern now for the fishing net. First thing I'm going to do is cut out a section of the plywood. I'm going to lay it on top of another section of plywood, and then cut out both patterns at the same time, because I want them to be 1-inch thick. The plywood is 1/2-inch thick. I'll stack 2 of them and glue them together, basically, to get at least 1-inch thick. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is mark out the overall size for the second layer of 1/2-inch plywood for the pattern, and then I'm going to cut it out with a skill saw. Okay, so I'm going to secure both these layers of 1/2-inch plywood together with a couple of screws. First though, I'm going to drill some pilot holes for those. Now I'm going to cut out the outside pattern for the biggest fishing net with this jigsaw right here. Okay, so this is the largest fishing net pattern right here that I cut out with a jigsaw. It's 2 layers of 1/2-inch plywood. Screwed together right now, but I'm going to take the screws out and I'm going to glue this stuff together so it's kind of permanently together. And then I'll cut out the other 3 fishing net patterns out of this piece. Total of 4. Okay, just going to add some glue to this guy and screw it back together. really need to add glue in the middle of this pattern here, because that's all going to be scrap wood in the middle. It's really just the outside that I'm interested in. Outside part of this pattern. I'm going to add just a little bit more glue to this guy, just to make sure it's well secured together. Add this other piece on top. Again, try and get it lined up perfectly. Add those screws back in. Add a few more screws to really secure it really well. And that should do it. Pretty good. Okay, that's with it glued together, and add some screws to this thing, and also added some clamps here. I'm going to let it dry. When it dries, I'll go ahead and finish up cutting out the other 3 patterns. Okay, going to cut this part off right here. This is going to be a template for the handle for the biggest net. Okay, I'm going to drill a pilot hole right here. That'll allow me to get the jigsaw in there to start cutting out the next smallest fishing net pattern here, around this way. Now I can get the jigsaw in there and start cutting out that inner pattern. This is the completed pattern for the biggest fishing net right here. And the handle part of it will come down this way, like this. And then there'll be strips. I haven't really decided about how many I want to do yet, but there'll be maybe 4 or 5 strips that go around the perimeter of this, and they'll get clamped in place and glued in place. I'm going to cut these smallest 2 fishing nets a little bit different than the biggest 2. You can kind of see the difference between these guys right here. And this is going to be rounded here for the bigger ones because of the inner handle piece. That'll be glued to that. But these smaller 2 guys, what I'm going to do is the strips that I glue around the perimeter of this to form the handle, I'm going to glue those guys right together, and that's going to form the handle itself, as the strips themselves. I'm just going to take a sanding block to the outside of these patterns, take off any imperfections in how I cut them out, you know, try and smooth things out a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfect, really, but the smoother it is, the better I think it's going to turn out. So just kind of smooth things out a little bit, take any burrs off it. You know, could impact how we're clamping that thing together. Take these guys off the top like that, right there, a little bit. Bring it down to the pencil line, you know, where I wasn't quite right on the line. So I'll just do that for each of the 4 patterns here. Got them all cut out. Okay, this is my fishing net jig, and what we have right here is the net pattern that I cut out in the earlier step, and I've got it screwed down to a 2x4 here with a straight line running down the middle of the 2x4. It's just an alignment marker, and I've lined up these 2 marks here to kind of keep the pattern straight. And I have these little blocks here that are going to be used to help kind of position the strips so that they're all flush, that they're all perfectly in line with each other. I've got a couple of those blocks back here. I'll use part of the 2x4 right here for alignment, and then over here in this section I'm going to zoom in on that. Over here, what I've got, here's the piece of walnut, the handle for this particular fishing net that I'll use, and I cut this out with a combination of the table saw and a bandsaw. Table saw was this part here, the straight part, and then the bandsaw right here. I just penciled in, you know, a radius here to make it line up with the pattern that I have here, so it's a nice smooth curve. And yeah, so that's that piece there. And what I have here is another part of the fixture, where there's the 2x4 in the middle, and I've got 2 more 2x4s on the sides. And I've covered everything with this blue masking tape, because when I go to glue the strips, I want something that's easily removable. I don't like the idea of using you know, something like oil or wax or something like that on here, because I don't want that to interfere with gluing the strips together. I'd rather just have to deal with you know, this removable tape, and it's pretty easy to deal with the tape. So yeah, I've got 2 2x4s, and then I've got a couple of flat strips here that I've got screwed down to the 2x4s. And the idea with these is two things. One is when I glue the strips together, I'll need a place to hold them temporarily in place, you know, because I'm only going to be able to you know, add one at a time. It's not really a good idea to add a bunch at a time, because you just increase the chance of cracking the strips, you know, when they're bending around fairly tight bend radiuses. So I need something to hold it, and then once I get them all in there, I'll take these screws out, and then I'll take some clamps, and then I'll clamp down on that, and that will be, well, this will be the part that I want to keep nice and straight, you know, in relation to this handle here. So I don't need any curves or anything like that. I need it perfectly straight in that area. So that's that part of it. And this part is the tricky part right here, where you transition from this curved part here on the fishing net template here. You'll curve around, and then you'll have to attach to the handle part here. So you're kind of doing a fair amount of bends right there, and so I need a method to be able to clamp down on that, on the individual strips. And this is the method that I came up with. And the idea is that you'll take pieces on both sides, 3 pieces, and each one of those will be clamped with an individual, wood clamp. And so it can, independently clamp down on the strips and the handle at the same time, which that's going to have glue on it as well, because I want to glue everything together all in one step. And yeah, so the trick to this is that when you clamp down on this, what it's going to want to do is the clamp pressure is actually going to want to move these pieces downward, or this direction, because of this curve right here. And it's going to want to push this handle that way. So if you just try to use the clamps, on the strips themselves, what's going to end up happening is that clamp's just going to move down here, and you'll end up with never being able to get a really good clamp right here on this part. And this is like one of the most important parts of the whole thing, where it just starts to join between the net part to the handle part. So that's the idea with this method here. And yeah, they're back here. This is the stopper, basically. So when I unscrew this, they'll be clamped. When I clamp these guys down, it's going to want to push that way, but this piece here is going to stop that. And another thing I would mention, if anybody wants to try this out, is something I've learned over trying this a couple times, is that you've got to ensure that your strips both will be able to be bent, without cracking. And that's a real issue with doing this, as you're bending some pretty tight bends. I'm not doing any steam bending. I've actually tried that before, and I didn't have very good results with it. So I'm doing cold bending on thinner strips is the method that I'm using, and it does work for what I'm doing. But what you've got to do is you've got to ensure that when say I've got all my strips in here, and I'm wanting to start to clamp this down, you've got to ensure that it's all perfectly secure before you start to glue it. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with this huge hassle, to try and quickly figure out, well, how are you going to, get that thing to be perfectly sandwiched, all together really well, So that's just a little thing that I learned in doing this a few times. But that's really the idea there, with the template. I don't have these guys here unscrewed, but you can kind of see the idea there, that I'm going to clamp down on each of these individually. And I'll show a close-up of that over on the other side here, so you can see that a little better. Yeah. So, yep. So you can put 3 different clamps in that area and get it secured. There we go. And it does seem to be working pretty good. And again, this is the most critical part right here and here. Where the strips are, joining the handle, and it's the toughest to clamp and get, perfectly clamped together. You don't want any gaps right there. Right. Well, let me zoom in really quick so you can kind of see example what I'm talking about. Right there. That right there is a gap, and you can't allow that at all. And I don't have this kind of clamp down all the way, but before you ever try to glue these strips together, you've got to make sure that there's no cases like that. This is with all the strips clamped into place. Pretty much used every clamp that I have, and I probably could have even used more. It's really essential to clamp it down just about as good as you can, because the entire shape is curves, so the objective is to really sandwich those strips of wood together just tightly as possible, so you have a nice consistent shape. You can correct some of that later with sanding, but if there's gaps between the strips, you can't correct that. You can only correct on the outside, basically, if there's some sort of problem there. Yeah, so you can kind of see why I use tape on everything, because this glue I'm using is Gorilla Glue. Oops. This glue I'm using is Gorilla Glue, and this stuff, it works really well. It's waterproof. It's extremely sticky, and you want to try to keep that stuff off your hands if at all possible. I use gloves, you know, when I'm dealing with this stuff. The glue is so sticky that in the whole process, usually what ends up happening is the glove gets kind of ripped because it sticks to whatever it is that I'm working on. So, but they do help a lot. And yeah, so clamped everything down. You can kind of see, I'm going to move the camera over here so you can kind of see this a little better, what's going on over here. You can kind of see there the strips here and here, you know, and the handle in the middle. This portion here is kind of a straight part. I want this to be sandwiched straight. Another kind of key feature of this fixture is that these back plates right here, these guys here, they prevent everything from shifting this way, but they also keep this piece in line, you know, the handle piece in line with the net, which is all based off of that center line that I talked about before. On this lower 2x4 here, there's a little center line here, and I just kind of marked off from that center line, you know, the width of this guy, you know, to kind of lock this handle in place so it's perfectly straight with the net up on this end, right? Otherwise, your handle is going to be crooked and it won't look right. Yeah, you can see that with this Gorilla Glue. I'm going to see if I can zoom in. One of the negatives, and it's really not a big negative, is that this stuff foams up quite a bit. You can kind of see there, in between each of the strips, there's a bunch of foam forming. What I do is I will, when it's done, I'll let it sit for 24 hours, and I'll come back with a wood chisel, and it's really quickly removed, that foam material. I don't sand it. I just use a wood chisel and get the majority of it off, and then you can kind of start with sanding. Actually, I use the wood chisel a lot also to kind of get it roughed in and try to get as even as possible with the wood chisel first, and then start to hit it with the sanders. And yeah, that's about it. It seemed to work pretty well. Over here in the corners, you know, this is the toughest part again, right here. It seemed like it was fully seated on both sides, but you know, with that foam coming up, I can't really tell 100% until I get it out and get it all sanded. But that'll be really the only area I have of concern with how this guy turned out. None of the strips cracked or anything like that. They went in there pretty quickly. Oh, that's another good thing about Gorilla Glue, is that the set time is about a half hour, which is really essential for doing something like this. You have to have a glue that has as long as possible set time. And if it was an hour, I'd be even happier, you know, because it just takes a long time to put these clamps on. I have these C clamps here, and you know, if somebody was going to do this, I'd probably suggest using the other type, not the C clamps, but these you know, these wood clamp types here. They don't hold as strongly, but you really don't need to hold that strong with this stuff. I like these guys better because they're quicker, you know, than these guys. You're kind of really fumbling around with just tightening them up. And I found in the past that you can easily over tighten these C clamps also. So yeah, I'd suggest using these type wherever you can. The one negative with these type clamps, as you kind of see here, is you can't really fit as many of those in there. They're just generally bigger. So probably the smallest ones you can find are generally better. You know, you can just fit more of them in there. They're cheaper. You can get more of them. Because like I said, this right here, I really could have used more of these guys. This is probably about the minimum, but this is everything that I have, so I just had to kind of deal with it. It's been about a day since I've glued this up. You can see that the glue here is all foamed up here. It's pretty cured. I just got done tearing down most of the jig that I had. There's a little bit left. The piece is still pretty glued in place, but I've got tape under everything where there would be glue, right? So it's just it's just a matter of getting that tape up. And I was going to take these last couple of 2x4 pieces off here to help get that broken free from there. And yeah, take a little bit of work there to get the tape broken free from each of the pieces. I think I've got actually one screw. Yeah, there it is. One screw left in this piece over here. Got to kind of take it apart gently, as gently as you can. Last thing we want to do is break the glue here on the strips. Take it apart as gently as you can. The last step is just to get this piece here out. This plywood pattern here in the middle of the hoop here, and there, I think it's getting pretty close to being ready to come off there. I've got everything just taken off. There's the bottom side right there. Take these guys off. That's the thing about the tape, you know. If I didn't have tape on there, that would be a real tough time getting those pieces off. You gotta have tape on everything. So this last 2x4 piece here that needs to come off. This is the best way to do it here, probably like this. There we go. So that's it. That would be a real bugger right there to get that part out without tape. And once you get that off, you just start ripping the tape off. There's this last part here. What I usually do, I just gently tap it with the hammer, work it around. So you want to keep it off the table. Just gently work it around. Actually, the thing I found is, you can kind of see here where I've got it taped on the top part, and the best way to do it here is tapping it out this way. Just kind of start working it around. Eventually it'll come out. It'll take a little bit of time, but eventually it'll come out. Yeah, so I just shut the camera off there for a minute because I wanted to just take my time, get this thing out. Really, I was just tapping it around, the perimeter here until you can see right there, it's basically coming out. You just kind of tap it out, and that's it. You end up with this piece here. It's pretty rough looking, but it won't take a whole lot of work to get this close to the final shape. You can kind of see here. Let me come out here a little bit. Hopefully you guys can see it. There. Yeah, there we go. What it's going to look like.